Our final panel of the day focuses on the future of sustainable development. As sustainability moves from aspiration to expectation, developers, designers, and owners are being asked to deliver buildings that perform across environmental, social, and economic dimensions. The future of development will be defined by how well these priorities are integrated from concept through construction and long-term operation. This panel brings together leaders from development, design, sustainability strategy, and academia to discuss where sustainable development is headed and what it will take to deliver resilient, high-performing projects at scale.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you today and to talk about the future of sustainability. So even though there's still a long way to come, it's really important to step back and recognize how far we've actually come so far. So with that in mind, I'd love to start by asking a big picture question. So looking back, sustainability is now closely tied to finance, risk, and long-term value. How is that changing real decision-making in design, development, and investment? And where's the industry headed next?
I can start. Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying until the very end and listening to us. I hope that this is interesting. I think I was listening to the previous panel, and as we were discussing with the group, how that transition how happened and how interesting it is from my perspective, which is on the design side of things, right? I work in an architecture office, to see how sustainability expectations from building, especially from the perspective of the people making them or selling and buying them, have gone from a very certification focused view of the world, right, where you want a label and that had some value, to a time where, because there is closer and closer connection to not only finance but kind of value of the property in a number of matters, right, from value in terms of the operational expenses or the risks that it might or might not have that require specific metrics, right, to compare two things, two designs in my case, and it's going that direction much more than it is the old label system, right? So right now, when we are working in a building, sustainability from like a LEED certifying perspective is not distinguishing yourself as better, is not distinguishing yourself as worse. And then we have more and more clients asking questions about specific metrics. Right? What is your energy use? How much power can I accommodate for tenants? Am I going to have to pay for anything in the next 20 years? And that is really interesting, right? Because I think that puts more responsibility on those of us who are trying to figure out what that looks like, but also probably leads to better buildings or to a better sense of why sustainability is valuable. So I hope that it's going more and more in that direction.
Okay. I'll go next. I'll pick up on what Carlos was saying. I think apart from kind of maturing from just certification into actual metrics, I also think I remember starting back in 2007 and 8, and we would speak about energy efficiency and percentage reductions, and it felt like an abstract number, right? Like you're trying to reduce something from something. Well, what is the baseline? What are you reducing? What does that mean in terms of emissions? It was kind of arbitrary almost. And we've come a long way to now look at carbon. Like we understand exactly what we're accounting for, why that impacts our environment, right? So the shift has gone from being just super efficient to actually reducing carbon. And the other thing, and this is what helps me kind of stay positive, because I think if you look back 15 years, and you guys are young, so you probably don't know. But we've been around and we've seen the development and maturity of this industry, and we've seen 15 years ago, if you asked me, would you be counting carbon for chipboard that goes into your space, I'd be laughing. But we're there. We're doing that for project after project, right? So we've really learned a lot. We've matured a lot, and I think we have kind of come to that curve where we're going to continue to improve. And I see ourselves becoming much more efficient, smart in the way we do these things. So it's a lot easier, and we do that repeatedly, and eventually it becomes, just everyday thing, which is starting to become anyway. But
I'm going to just offer a comment more from the commercial real estate sector, which is my kind of bias, I would say, in terms of my experience. we're seeing now a continuation of what we've always seen in real estate, which is be very market responsive, very customer focused. Customers want exotic stone in lobbies, they get it. They want exotic wood in elevator cabs, they get it. They want fancy high-end toilet fixtures, they get it. Now the customer are really coming to developers and owners with a much more sophisticated set of requirements and requests around sustainability. And one of the drivers seems to be that we've observed is in a market like this, real estate now is a differentiator in a labor-constrained market. They're trying to recruit all of you. And real estate is a differentiator, and they know the values that you all come to it, and that's translating into RFP requirements that come to developers. So I think that is a difference, a step in sophistication that I think we've seen in the last, I don't know, maybe definitely since COVID.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see the shift from just certifications to now actually it being implemented. So that brings me to a different angle and different question, more on global perspective. So sustainability frameworks and expectations differ globally, and how do firms navigate those differences while maintaining consistent standards across their portfolios?
I'm going to try this. Hi, everyone. Lauren Moss. I'm with Vornado. We're a very New York-centric owner, operator, developer, but from a global perspective, and in terms of setting targets, you've seen a lot of change over the past couple of years, just from our federal government, from the EU. There are lots of sort of frameworks were set by international bodies that have all evolved. I would say there are a couple consistent frameworks or metrics or approaches to measurement that are acceptable globally, that I would say also, like you had Paul and Laura sitting up here before, they both know what the GHG protocol is. They both know what a science-based target is. They know what LEED is, which is, created in the US, but I think there are standards across the world like BREEAM that are measurable as well. I think what we're starting to see is what we look at as these were all voluntary for a very long time, and I think we're moving toward more regulation around this, which impacts how we do reporting and how we do development. And I think you're starting to see even, I'm going to point at Sarah because she's back there, but GRESB moving towards performance-based metrics, right? Which I think you also heard people talk about at the start of this, which is we are all trying to figure out a consistent approach to measurement, performance, whether that is NOI, whether that's rent, because that is, real estate is a business. I don't want anyone to ever forget that. We're talking about sustainability. Sustainability has to drive business. As Scott said, we are responsive to our tenants. If our tenants want a gym, we build a gym. If our tenants want marble lobbies, we do that. The other thing we do is we offer them organics, because you all understand, I hope, that you should be separating your trash properly. And if you go work for a company that does that, it makes you feel better, right? So I would say there are lots of different components to it, but there are some standard approaches across the world. We are seeing all of them evolve, though, with this.
Yeah, and I think that we work a lot globally in many places, right? So we might be doing projects in New York and London and Singapore, and the differential on the standards is actually quite significant, right? And if you are trying to deliver the same thing in every place, you're not necessarily going to succeed, even if you were using the same way of measuring things, which often is not the case. But what is becoming clear is that everybody's sort of going to the same thing, different speeds, right? Different deadlines, but even places where maybe 10 years ago, the discussion around emissions in buildings was much weaker, like in China, for example. now is arguably catching up to what the US is doing in many cases, and how they are tying real estate development and incentives and finance to it around these metrics. So working globally, you realize that what here, for example, now might seem a little bit of a slowdown in appetite for certain things is a little bit of a bleep. And more importantly, that because it's a global market, you might be working here and you might have investors and funds that are coming from somewhere else. And if everybody else is expecting is asking for a certain type of marble in sustainability terms, then here we have to do the same, or we have to be able to respond, right? So it forces you, looking at projects globally, to realize that there's sort of a translation issue always, but that you might have people asking for these sustainability expectations from other markets and other investment frameworks that you have to be able to respond to. You also get to get the best of, right? So it's easy to explain to a Taiwanese developer the importance of, say, emissions reporting under a certain protocol, because you can explain to them what Local Law 97 is in New York and you have a framework for it. Equally, it's easier to explain to a developer in Miami what the risk implications might be of not taking into account resilience seriously, because you are working maybe in Hong Kong, where this is a given and there's extensive regulation and you have nothing to do but to take it into consideration. So I think that transition is something that helps a lot when you're trying to explain what you're offering people, right?
Just one other, I was going to say that point about, when you're, the advantage of working in a global economy is a lot of these companies, especially the large companies that are working at a global platform, if they have a standard established in Europe, they're not going to reduce that standard if they're working in the United States, right? So it helps all of us kind of excel. But I think one thing I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Singapore. I was there last year and we met with their chief urban designer. And what was really interesting she was presenting all the things Singapore was trying to do around energy, water, climate resiliency, and everything was from the perspective of national security. And that just brought it to a whole other level, right? They have to depend on Malaysia for water, for energy. They're worried about sea level rise because it's it's literally an island. So when it becomes that urgent, you start to see changes and you learn from that, and hopefully transfer it to other parts of the world.
Thank you. And we have Professor Schwagerl here, and he also teaches the global real estate class. So I was just wondering if you have an academic perspective.
Sure. So the first thing to recognize is NYU students, we're not just educating them to understand real estate, we're educating them to be leaders in their field, right? And that means that they need to know where innovation is taking place so they could take it to that next level. If we're just green enough today, that's not enough for tomorrow. So it's the future here that will create the environment that my grandchildren will live in, et cetera. Now, New York is a leader in green buildings, but we were not always that way, right? So it takes time. There's an evolution. And NYU is a global school, so when we go on global field intensives, like the students I went to Africa with over the winter break, or the students that I'm taking to Japan in the global class that I'm teaching, we look at what other countries are doing. How does that compare to what we know? It's the ability when the Sustainability Club takes their students out to a high-rise and visits what Lauren is doing in Vornado and what's in their own backyard, so they'll be able to go back and question, oh, I know we could do this. I've seen this done before. There's an ability to do that. So what we educate the students on are those metrics that they're talking about. How to speak that foreign language so it's not so foreign anymore. And then also, there are so many products and technologies now that are in the marketplace that didn't exist before. How do they approach government for tax credits to take advantage of that? What is it that they have to open up their mouth and ask for, or at least examine, the possibility of bringing into the development that they have. So these are important things that we teach the students moving forward in terms of being able to question, is this real or is this fake? And how does this apply to the bottom line? What does this mean to my insurance costs? What does this mean for the return, the efficiency of this building system that I'm going to put in place? How do I use adaptive reuse to my own advantage, let alone to my clients or people that are occupying the space? And pre-COVID, there was very little conversation about light and air requirements. Now it's an understood thing about clean air and light in your building that didn't exist before. So the factor of wellness comes into place that changes the conversation from, oh, you're just a tree hugger, to, oh, shouldn't we be doing this for the occupants of the building? How is this a differentiator? Isn't this better to build a better building?
Thank you very much. And to kind of shift to my next question, which thank you for your insights, is also more practical. So how is sustainability showing up in day-to-day development and operations, and also in decisions, and how does that differ between large projects and smaller or even startup projects?
Happy to lead off and start with the larger projects. It's been really remarkable how fast the transition to electrification, full electrification in the commercial and institutional market has been. And New York City is kind of going through a moment. There are 7 super tall, very large, high-rise office buildings being designed and constructed. Really, as of the end of last year, there are 3 more announced this year, which is unprecedented in my almost 40 years being in this market. So there's a bubble, I guess you might say, in a good way, of recovery in the very kind of top end of the market. But the decisions around sustainability and electrification, and I don't want to speak for Lauren and Vornado's process at all, but just observing broadly, these are very short conversations. They're going to add 70% to the CapEx of a project to electrify. They're going to add cost to OpEx because electricity, yes, is more expensive than the very low cost of natural gas we've had here for the last couple of decades. But these are conversations that just are over in a meeting. And it just, to me, it reflects, I caught a little bit of the last panel. Yeah, and I don't mean to discount at all the importance of the economics of operating costs and energy costs, but there's another driver very much at play, and we're seeing it right now. And I don't know, I think it's a learning moment about the elasticity of markets, and of course that just translates to rent that the tenants will pay, and tenants are going to pay it in abundance, it appears, in this next era around this. The other thing I would just want to add as a change is during COVID, we all went through a crash course in health and safety around air quality inside buildings, of course. And I think a lot of us felt like, okay, a couple of years later, this is going to kind of ebb, memories are short, and, ventilation and filtration, okay, we'll kind of be back to, maybe to where we were before. Not really the case. And the science around indoor air quality is moving quickly. And that's something we're very intrigued about. These same projects, these are ventilated at 3 times the code level of ventilation. The filtration is way above standards. It's all with a basis or foundation and awareness about the importance that we need to be treating air that we breathe like the water we drink. And that's really making its way into this market even right now. So there's a couple points.
I'll just jump in. So clearly Scott knows Vornado very well. One of those super talls is ours. We hope a second one maybe is also. But what I would say is sustainability is, I always joke, you can call me a tree hugger, whatever it is, right? The word, the phrase, the ESG, whatever you want to say it is a lot of things. And so when you look at an organization like Vornado, who is attracting the top tenants across the world, it is table stakes for us to say, we're going to build Citadel's world headquarters in New York City, and we are going to have a LEED Platinum, WELL Platinum, all-electric building, right? Like, that's the expectation. By the way, there's regulation that doesn't allow us to put natural gas in the building. So probably if we were allowed to, it might have been a discussion topic. But we're not allowed to, right? So it has to be an all-electric building. It could have had a steam backbone, which I would have advocated.
But Lauren, I would but I found remarkable though, even so,
Yeah.
I mean, the cost premium, when you talk about making an electrified high-rise building, we're talking about, I mean, literally,
Yeah, no, it's-
high single
it is-
percentage points increases in the budget. Think about the pro forma.
Correct.
And the fact that there isn't just more hue and cry about this, like the fact there's a law in the books, I just find it's kind of unique in this time,
Yeah.
thinking about eras past.
Absolutely. And I would say, I think also the interesting thing that Scott talked about is the indoor air quality, which typically drives up energy consumption, right? So not only are you starting from an all-electric building, and then you're adding in this intense requirement for clean air, because the understanding by the primary tenant is the better the air quality, the better the output of the employee, which
Yeah,
is
and
wonderful.
I think you have to, you really have to explain the quality of the tenant that you're building for.
Correct. Well, that's
Okay,
why.
without
you're-
naming the name,
It's Citadel.
you are,
It's public.
it's
Like we are.
they're hedge funds, they're tech
Yeah.
companies. These are people who are competing for the very best, the very brightest, and they want, the very best signature building they could buy, money, no object. But there are takeaways from that others can learn from, right? And I think that was mentioned, but really not in any depth in our last panel, that, we don't all have to be the Uber of buildings. But there are so many things that we could do to make our building better and less problematic for the planet.
Yeah, and I would say, and Varun could definitely can speak to this more. I think the challenge with you can build an all-electric building. You look at affordable housing in New York City. Let's bring it down a notch, right? We're all congratulating ourselves that we're building this, Citadel world headquarters that's all electric. Affordable housing's been all electric way longer than us. They've been doing way more interesting things than we have in the commercial sector for a very long time. If you want to learn about sort of where people are innovative, it is not in the commercial market. We are stodgy and slow to take on new technology because we have much higher risk profiles, right? So we need to be able to go to our lenders and demonstrate that we can provide the product at the value with the rent that we believe and the income, et cetera. So I would say that I think but the material issue is one that, I think is the amount of equipment that goes into a building to be all electric is way more than the amount of equipment when you put in a steam system. And we haven't really wrestled with
Understand
that.
that very well, yeah. No, but I think that the affordable housing example is an important one, right? Because these things are happening for many reasons. Some of them have to do with what your tenants want. And commercial tenants are a very specific animal with high expectations, and depending who your tenants are with, very progressive. Like they're catering to a certain type of hire that they want to have, so they need to make sure that they can do certain things. Right. But I think there's a big middle ground of buildings that if it wasn't for, like you were saying, because we are required, the conversation wouldn't happen. It would be a much more strategic one, right? Like before, now we have the requirement coming up soon, a local 97 and all that, so everybody's sort of educated on it relatively quickly. And the risk of not doing it and having to deal with the unknown consequences in 10 years or in 15 years is enough to scare people off and consider it seriously. But if you look less than 10 years back and you were having that conversation, it was all electric ready. Well, let's maybe save the space. Well, let's see where this goes. So I think that it's all of it at the same time. I think that we have more educated tenants and clients, right? This last couple of years is the first time that I've got an RFP for a developer that not only required us to be, you were talking about SBTI, us to be SBTI members and reporters, and to meet certain very discrete emission requirements for the building. But also they give us a full table of this is how much material carbon, this is how much energy. So the level of education is really high, and clearly the investment behind them is asking for these things. But I think at the larger scale of real estate, without the regulation side, is really, really hard to create the first examples that then people go and say, oh, we can do these, we can electrify. We're doing now a lab, right? It's really, really, really hard to electrify a medical lab. But once you've done it once, then people understand, oh, wait, there's a cost to it, and I can understand it, and I can figure out if it makes sense or not. So I think the regulation piece is a huge, huge component to this.
Yeah, and I think key component that you just mentioned there was the investment behind it. So if your money is coming from foreign REITs, funds, or others, they follow a higher standard than we do at certain times. And they require those regulations to be able to report back. So now it's in your RFP because they want it reported back to their investors. And that's the part that the students find the most interesting, particularly the ones that want to go into investment banking or to private equity. You can't discount ESG because that's a driving force behind the metrics that you were talking about, Lauren, that creates the funding for the buildings that are going up.
I mean, I would say even outside of the regulatory environment or the financial investment asks, if you think about all these strategies, at the end of the day, you're creating a better product, right? And one thing to remember is that everything is kind of systematically linked. So if you're saving energy, yes, it's a long-term savings for the building operations. When I speak to a client now, I no longer say, you need to do this or that in sustainability. I simply ask, what are you trying to do to succeed? And I can find you a way of aligning the sustainability targets, whether it's marketing, lease rentals, or even, we just finished a project for Wells Fargo in Dallas, which is net positive energy. And they have done it, and it's an owner-occupied building. They can see the benefit of that, and it's doable, right? And also electrification varies from climate to climate. It's a little bit easier to do Dallas because cooling is all electrified anyway. No heating necessary, well, except for the last week. But it's a smaller component. So I think it varies a lot, but trying to think in systems, understanding the linkages between different aspects. And as an architect, I would always promote passive ideas. So if you think about these strategies early on in a project, New York is unique, you're limited to the grid, but outside of New York, there's so much more you can do from design strategies. Never forget that.
I was at a real estate and insurance conference last fall, which isn't a crowd I usually hang out in. And I was amazed that even in this climate, kind of what's going on, in this country, the steadfast enthusiasm for sustainability within real estate assets. And the consensus of that group was there's a correlation. They're not really saying it's a causation, but there's a correlation from an asset standpoint between sustainability and reduced risk. And so for them, it's just better business.
It's a no-brainer.
It's something, there's some connotation that, whether it's land use, entitlement risk, whether it's execution risk and construction, whether it's leasing risk, whatever. It was just like the sustainable project has a differentiation. And I think that's, why is that? And I wonder if, to pull off a sustainably recognized project, it's a higher degree of difficulty. Yeah, and it takes a little more expertise. And I wonder if that means you have an organization built with more capability, and therefore it's gonna seep out in all aspects of the business. Maybe that's just my own, inference.
If they're going to flip the building or sell it later on, are they going to sell a non-green building that's worth far less, or are they building into the future when the return will at least be somewhat where it should be, if not better? That's part of it, and insurance companies understand that.
I was going to add two things. One is there's this thing around Local Law 97 that people think if you have an all-electric building, you won't have a fine. That is 100% not true. Absolutely untrue. No one should ever go around saying that. You can have a fully electric building and still be fined a lot. If you go over your emissions limit because you have a dense building, you will be fined. So electrification does not solve for regulation. And I think that's really important. And it is one of the things we spend a lot of time working on when we look at development projects or redevelopment from Vornado's perspective, which is if we're going to invest in a project that maybe will end up being all electric, let's model actually how this building is going to be used so we can compare it to the regulation. Because what we don't want to do reputationally or from a lender perspective is spend $6 billion or $5 billion on a project that then has a fine. We say we're building this sustainable, and it won't. If we're building a highly sustainable building that then has a fine based on an emissions law. So I do think one of the things for all of you to understand is that regulation, sometimes you think the solution electrification and it's not. So the phrase electrification drives me nuts. It should be something else because it can't just be electrification. That's my big.
True.
Thank you very much. And it's great to hear that sustainability is not a separate track anymore, as Lauren mentioned in our call the other day. So it's really being incorporated into the business. Now, I wanted to also ask what capabilities and mindsets matter most for firms and professionals looking to lead the next phase of sustainable development, as we have a lot of students and young professionals sitting in the crowd.
I can speak from the architecture firm, and then others can talk about, well, I don't know if only the architecture firm, but in the context of all of these, I think that you want, if somebody who is advising somebody making a decision about a property, let's say, new or existing, to be able to fold all of these things that we were talking about into the decision process as soon as possible, and more importantly, maybe in a language that aligns with however they are making decisions, right? So if Lauren's perspective on the problem of a property is cost or tenant satisfaction or tenant lease language and things she can put there, and I cannot speak to those terms because I can only say this material is better because it's more sustainable, then it doesn't matter that probably in the long term the more sustainable solution was better and had less risks and all that. It doesn't help her making the decision. So what I'm observing is that when we, as people are more sophisticated in addressing these issues, when we're tackling a project, you need to bring this, you need to bring very full and very real metrics very early in the process. You cannot sort of, go around at the beginning and then at some point when you have enough detail make a decision. You need to really fold it when, say, somebody is making financial planning for a project and really understanding how that's going to work. So I think professionals that are trying to bring more sustainability into real estate need to get used to use vehicles to deliver to help with decision making with real data as soon as possible. So you're going to see more and more decarbonization plans for buildings, right? Which is not something that you do when you're designing the building. Before you design the building, you sit down, you model 15 options of systems, you model the benefits of having a more passive building, you put numbers to it, and then you start the project. And maybe sometimes then you hire the architect or the mechanical engineer. I think that space, if we don't occupy it, then doesn't matter the willingness and the things that align, you cannot be there, right? So I think that skill set of learning more about the language of the decision maker, what if it's a commercial real estate developer, is definitely different than if it's an affordable housing residential developer, and being able to bring data for decision making before you start actually designing a building is critical.
I would add, I always say, like, I don't feel like I should have a job eventually. Sustainability has lived in a bubble for a very, very long time. We are in this very happy bubble. You saw lots of people come on the stage and talk about sustainability today. We all know each other, we share information, we're friends, and it is an incredible group of peers that I have had the privilege of working with for now 18 years, ever since I graduated from Wagner with my planning degree, right? So the reality is sustainability needs to be embedded in every component of a real estate business. I'm very lucky, actually, at Vornado that it's table stakes for them to call up, and they literally do. Like our development team calls up Scott and it's like, in 6 weeks, we need this. And they know they have to hit these standards, right? It's been ingrained in the work that we do. But I agree with Carlos. I have spent the last almost 4 years at Vornado learning how to speak about sustainability in a very different way. And I love to get into the weeds of the materials and the energy and the consumption and the regulation. But the way to be successful in this world is to talk about it in the way that it exists, which is as a business, which brings value to our shareholders and attracts the best tenants. That, I think, is the really important thing. The other thing I'll say, which is really underrated, is the ability to do huge amounts of data analysis in Excel. Because that, bar none, is like one of the biggest skills that we're missing in sustainability, is like hard math. And that's really, really important.
Ryan, you mentioned that one of the primary objectives of this program was to create leaders. You know, and leadership is quantifiable and defined, you know, to some extent, but there's some intangibles to it. So I'd encourage everybody to really lean into what leadership really means for them. And because it really can be and should be probably a lifelong pursuit. But back to sustainability, I know there was a period of time, probably a couple decades ago, when it was, you know, we were really at the inflection point, you could say, of the S-curve, at least in this market. I started explaining and talking about sustainability as really just change and change management. And, you know, and it coincided with I think, an Apple ad campaign about Think Different or something at that time, and it all just kind of, you know, seemed to resonate. But the point was, if you think about it, you break it down, sustainability is just about doing things differently. And you say, okay, you know, that's you know, what's significant about that? Our industry, unfortunately, you know, it's not the vanguard of rapid change and innovation. Just isn't. A lot of reasons that explain why that is. But this is not Silicon Valley 20 years ago. So I think what I would say to you all is, as leaders, come leaning in as much as you can to looking at things differently and thinking, you know, all the overused adages about approaching problems differently, because there's an imperative, I think, we're up against. Look at the infrastructure in this country. Look at the amount of build that has to happen in the energy sector, in real estate, a growing economy. And our industry isn't well positioned, per se, to meet that demand. And it's going to create huge opportunities for people and organizations and companies, I think, that can really come at the problem very differently than the last 100 years.
I'm just going to add that, you know, for me as a designer, we're always trying to think creatively how to come up with a solution to these issues and problems in technology. And I love it when the real estate industry or the finance industry comes from the other side and is innovative about their financial models or, you know, development models that allow innovation to happen from our end, right? So it's back and forth. And, you know, that to me defines in some ways this leadership. When you're in the industry, when you're pushing, you know, ways and means and changing the way you lease a space, or, you know, how do you pull back or get back your investment in new technologies, that allows us in our industry, in our space, to kind of innovate more. And we keep moving. And to Scott's point, you know, it's simply changing the way we do things. And you need to help us facilitate that change so that it becomes a day-to-day thing.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one or two more Q&A questions. So anyone in the audience, if you have a question.
Stand up. Yeah, ask your question.
Hi, my name is Ian Simides. I'm with 9.Energy. We build community storage here in New York City, so a very specific asset class. And my question is sort of a little bit maybe policy, regulatory, wonky, but because of what we build, we've gotten very involved in pushing Con Edison on their efforts around distribution. And I think that it's interesting in terms of the future of sustainability. Thank you. In terms of the future of sustainable development in the asset classes that you all build,
you have an incredibly outsized impact on the grid. And you can ask, or you should be, in my opinion, asking a lot of distribution level utilities in terms of their grid planning. If you're going to build an all electric, super tall building and it still isn't, or maybe it is, hopefully getting to 97 compliance. But I guess my question is about efforts in this industry to coordinate and put pressure on distribution level utilities and maybe even transmission level utilities to think about their grid planning in a way that serves your ESG goals and your sustainability needs as you're building better buildings.
I hope everyone was here for this morning and heard Kevin and Brandon. And it's like, you want to get in the weeds of this stuff, let's go. It's amazing, right? New York City's grid almost collapsed in June. We came within 2 percentage points of absolute brownouts because of the old infrastructure, the prolonged heat wave. We all participate as large owners in something called demand response. That allows us to pull our buildings off the grid. That assumes they're not using all electric, right? So when you move to an all electric grid, you need a backup source when you pull it off. The state has put in place some very specific regulations around the generators that you are allowed to use. That means that most people who were participating using a generator in demand response can no longer do that because their generators don't meet the state requirement, which means there's less participation in demand response and there's more use of the peaker plants, which are in environmental justice communities and impacting people's asthma rates. This is all very public. So when you talk about what the real estate industry does, there's an organization called the New York Energy Consumer Council. It is a very small but mighty / very nerdy group of people who go deep in the weeds of regulation around Con Ed and the Public Service Commission and the Independent System Operator. Really, we fight rate cases. What we're trying to do is ensure that the utilities do what they're supposed to do, that they build what they're supposed to build, that they can't charge us for things they haven't done, right? And that when the state goes to try and build new facilities, it is on the backs of ratepayers. And so what is the efficient, responsible way for them to add supply to our, to our zone? I do think batteries are the future. I think they were talked about it this morning. We've had a lot of problems in the city putting batteries in because of the regulation around where batteries can go, and they can't go inside buildings right now. So I would just say there is a huge push by the real estate industry, and we are old and stodgy, but generally speaking, utilities are where we shine in terms of our advocacy. REBNY does a lot of work, but I do think it's really, really important for all of us, especially those of you who vote, to make your voices heard in that you want affordable, resilient, and sustainable energy, and distributed energy is one way to go. They're doing a project. You saw JP from Tishman on a panel today. Rock Center's doing a distributed energy project right now. We would love to see that be more efficient and more prevalent. But yeah.
Just to amplify a couple of points, I appreciate the question. I think it's well received. But I think it's important to also look at incentives and the incentives of regulated utilities in this state. They're really incentivized around making the case for large capital projects. That's how they generate returns for shareholders. So you'd think on one hand, they'd be all for, yes, let's reinforce the street. From the comment from the previous panel, right? The gentleman who couldn't electrify his appliances, right? You'd think Con Ed be pounding on the door of the regulators, right? Let me run more circuits down the street so I can serve the customers. That's evidently not quite the case. There are other kinds of projects that are more lucrative for the regulated utilities. And as Lauren mentioned, there are many other agencies that have important stakeholders. The whole battery storage issue, which I assume you know well. Why can't we put lithium ion in inside buildings? We can park 300 cars full of gasoline below a building. We can't put a couple of batteries in a building. that's the fire department. That's their jurisdiction. And they own that regulation, and they have a lot of, They have a lot of authority, they have a lot of autonomy, and they've chosen to take a pretty conservative position on this. So it's not just the utility companies that need to be engaged. And I think Lauren's correct. I mean, the Energy Consumer Council is a pretty mighty small organization, backed by all the big owners in the city, and it has influence. But it is a major regulatory regime, right, between the state and the city agencies, and change is just going to come over time.
Thank you very much. And we have time for one more.
Someone in the front row here, one of the brighter students.
Hello. Hi, Jaden Vasquez, Schack, grad student. So yeah, a lot of conversations around the built environment, specifically buildings. And I was curious about the side of sustainability that isn't the most sexy. So has there been any conversations about like any accountability towards the waste that's made from people in buildings, specifically sludge treatment, zero waste facilities, or like landfill? And is that an emerging sector you're seeing, or is there any way that developers or constructors can move towards addressing that issue as well?
You've literally made my day. I love a waste question more than anything. We actually have a waste target. So Vornado has a 75% diversion from landfill by 2030 waste target for our operating buildings. Construction is very different. Talk about change management. It's all human behavior, right? So we set up the infrastructure in all of our buildings, which is what we ask all of our designers to do. Make sure that in our facilities, we spend a huge amount of time in our new construction ensuring that you can get from centralized bin system in an office to a freight elevator. Down the freight elevator, you can be pushing the bins. You don't have to go too far. Where's the refrigerated room? What kind of large-scale incineration will there be on site in the future when these buildings go live? We assume there'll be more composting, so how do we handle that? And then we need power down there. Like, there's a huge amount of work going into the development so that we can lay out the spaces properly. But I will tell you, it is 100% dependent upon all of you to actually sort your waste properly. And I'm willing to bet that if I went to go look in the waste bins over here, that it's not correct. You're the future. I have 3 kids under the age of 21, so I say this with a lot of authority. It doesn't usually happen that easily. You can have all the signage in the world, but we are dependent upon people to make the right choice when they walk up to the waste bin. We do zero waste consulting. We do audits. We do signage. We do measuring waste tenant by tenant. We report, every one of our tenants can get their waste data every single month, like they get their energy data. It doesn't improve your waste performance. So if you have an idea on how to get people to look at a sign and put it in the right bin, I'm all ears. But we do spend a huge amount of time and effort on waste.
And repeat, like the same way that the grid might have issues in terms of capacity with electrification, wait until the issues come when we don't have enough landfill space to put the waste that we are producing, right? I think that people in New York should do more trips to some of the landfill or their own landfills, right? Like Fresh Kills Park and stuff like that, to really understand the scale of the problem that we don't see, but it has to go somewhere. And there's a very real future in which the cities start attaching taxes or other, penalties towards the amount of waste that we produce.
Oh my God. Fining for waste would be amazing.
But the construction, like probably the most exciting stuff from a building sustainability architecture perspective that we're talking about now is what happens with construction waste and how we avoid it, right? The whole idea of circularity in the built environment and the way in which you stop talking about material coming out of an existing building as waste and just talk about it as a resource, and how do you create a market for reusing components in a building. Like, that is where the edge in terms of innovation and sustainability is at right now, and what I feel everybody is talking about. And it's hugely important, and it's going to have the same infrastructural repercussions in the long term that energy has had, and we're just not talking about it. So I think it's a huge area of interest and of passion for a lot of us. I would also I like that Lawrence said before, oh, you know, I've loved participating of this group of people, and you can see like the little bit of glint in her eye, because I agree. I think that there is no group of people that has more fun doing what they do and that enjoy more their work than those of us who focus on sustainability in whatever aspect, right? Like engineering, the design, the real estate. You go to a sustainability conference, those are the people that are partying the hardest. And I think there is a sense of, there's a component of a business to all of this, but I think all of us work for different companies, but there is some sense of a joint idea, right? If we're working on these in different companies because we care about it. So there is an exchange of information. You're excited when other people are doing cool stuff that you don't always find in other industries, that I highly recommend to anybody that wants to get into these. Does it feel fair?
Thank you so much, and that's the perfect way to end. Thank you all for being here, and this was insightful.